I sat in that cold courtroom, my hands folded in my lap, watching my husband Trevor smirk at me from across the room. His lawyer had just finished explaining how I would walk away with practically nothing from our 12-year marriage. Trevor leaned back in his chair like he owned the world, and maybe he thought he did. "You'll never see a dime of my money again," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. His voice was full of satisfaction, like he was announcing he'd won the lottery. The way he looked at me made my stomach turn. This was the same man who used to bring me coffee in bed every morning, who promised we'd build our dreams together. Crystal, his 26-year-old secretary turned mistress, was sitting right behind him. She had her perfectly manicured hand on his shoulder, and when he spoke, she purred like a cat who'd caught a mouse. "That's right, baby." Her voice was sweet as honey, but I could see the poison underneath. She was wearing the diamond earrings I'd helped Trevor pick out for his mother's birthday last year. The sight of them made my chest tight with anger. Margaret, Trevor's mother, was sitting next to Crystal, and she looked happier than I'd seen her in years. She'd never liked me, not from the day Trevor brought me home. She thought I wasn't good enough for her precious son, wasn't rich enough, wasn't from the right family. Now she was getting her revenge. "She's not worth a cent," Margaret said with a grin that showed all her teeth. Never was. I wanted to scream. I wanted to stand up and tell everyone in that courtroom exactly what kind of people they really were. But I stayed quiet, just like I'd been doing for the past 6 months. I let them think they'd won. I let them believe I was just the broken, helpless wife who didn't know anything about business or money. Judge Mitchell was an older man with gray hair and kind eyes, but I knew he had a reputation for being tough on people who tried to cheat the system. He'd been reading through papers all morning, and now he picked up an envelope from his desk. My envelope. The one I'd hand-delivered to his office yesterday. My heart started beating so fast I thought everyone could hear it. This was the moment I'd been planning for months. All those nights I'd stayed awake gathering evidence. All those times I'd pretended to be asleep while Trevor made his secret phone calls. All those documents I'd copied when he thought I was just cleaning his office. It all came down to this letter. Judge Mitchell opened the envelope slowly, like he was unwrapping a present. I watched Trevor's face as the judge unfolded the papers inside. Trevor was still smirking, still confident that he'd outsmarted everyone. Crystal was whispering something in his ear, probably about how they'd celebrate tonight. Margaret was already planning how she'd spend the money she thought she'd helped steal from me. The judge started reading, and I saw his eyebrows go up. Then his eyes got wide. Then something amazing happened. Judge Mitchell started laughing. Not just a little chuckle, but a real deep belly laugh that echoed through the whole courtroom. Everyone turned to stare at him, confused and worried. Trevor's smirk started to fade. Crystal stopped whispering. Margaret's grin disappeared like someone had erased it with a giant eraser. Judge Mitchell kept reading, and he kept laughing. The sound filled the room and made my heart sing. After months of feeling powerless, after months of watching these 3 people plot against me, I was finally seeing the fear in their eyes that I'd been carrying in my chest. When the judge finally stopped laughing, he looked up at Trevor, Crystal, and Margaret. His face was calm, but I could see something dangerous in his eyes, something that made me think of a lion who'd just spotted his prey. "Well," Judge Mitchell said, his voice steady and quiet, "this is interesting." Those 4 words hit the courtroom like a bomb. Trevor's face went from confident to confused to scared in about 3 seconds. The color drained out of his cheeks so fast I thought he might faint. Crystal's mouth fell open, and she looked like a fish gasping for air. Margaret grabbed the edge of the table in front of her, her knuckles turning white. I felt a smile trying to break free on my face, but I kept it hidden. Not yet. I wasn't ready to show them that I knew exactly what was in that letter. I wasn't ready to let them see that their victim had become their hunter. The judge was still holding my letter, still looking at the 3 people who thought they'd destroyed my life. The silence in the courtroom was so thick, you could cut it with a knife. Everyone was waiting to see what would happen next, but only I knew the truth that was about to come out. 6 months ago, I'd discovered Trevor's affair in the worst possible way. I'd come home early from visiting my sister and found Crystal's jewelry in our bedroom. But instead of falling apart like they expected, I'd done something they never saw coming. I'd started investigating, and what I found was so much worse than just an affair. Trevor wasn't just cheating on me, he was stealing. Not just from me, but from his business partners, from his clients, from anyone who trusted him. And Margaret and Crystal weren't just helping him hide his affair, they were helping him hide millions of dollars in places where no one would ever find them. But I found them. And now Judge Mitchell was holding all the proof. 6 months earlier, I was living in a completely different world. I thought I had the perfect marriage, the perfect life. Trevor and I had built everything together. When he started his real estate company 10 years ago, I was right there beside him, working 18-hour days, using my marketing skills to help him find clients, even putting my own career dreams on hold so he could chase his. I remember the day everything changed like it was yesterday. I was supposed to be at my sister's house for the whole weekend, helping her plan her wedding. But she got sick with the flu, so I came home early on Saturday afternoon. I was actually excited to surprise Trevor, maybe cook his favorite dinner, and spend a quiet evening together. I walked into our bedroom to change clothes, and that's when I saw them. Crystal's earrings on my nightstand, the same sparkly diamond ones she wore to the office Christmas party. My heart stopped. For a moment, I just stared at them, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Maybe she'd left them here after a work meeting. Maybe there was some innocent explanation. But deep down, I knew. The way Trevor had been working late every night for months. The way he'd started taking phone calls in his car instead of in the house. The way he'd look at his phone and smile, then quickly put it away when I walked into the room. All those little signs I'd been ignoring suddenly made perfect sense. I picked up the earrings with shaking hands. They were warm, like someone had just taken them off. I sat down on our bed, the bed where Trevor and I had planned our future, where we'd talked about having children someday, where he'd promised to love me forever. And I cried. I cried until my chest hurt, and my eyes were so swollen I could barely see. But then something strange happened. The sadness turned into anger. And the anger turned into something else. Something cold and calculating. I realized that if Trevor was cheating on me, he was probably hiding other things too. And if he was hiding things, I needed to know what they were before I confronted him. So instead of screaming and throwing things like I wanted to, I put Crystal's earrings back exactly where I found them. I went to the bathroom and washed my face until the redness went away. Then I went downstairs and started dinner like nothing had happened. When Trevor came home that night, he kissed me on the cheek and asked about my sister's wedding planning. He was such a good liar. He looked right into my eyes and asked if I'd had a nice, relaxing weekend. I smiled and told him it was perfect. That's when I started paying attention to everything, really paying attention. I noticed that Trevor's phone was always face down on the table. I noticed that he'd started password protecting his laptop, something he'd never done before. I noticed that he was getting mail from banks I'd never heard of, and when I asked about it, he'd say it was just business stuff I wouldn't understand. The thing that really made me suspicious was the money. Trevor's business was doing better than ever, but somehow we never seemed to have more money in our joint account. When I asked him about it, he'd say he was reinvesting everything back into the company, that we needed to be patient. But I'd helped build that company. I knew how much money should be coming in. One night, about 2 weeks after I found the earrings, Trevor fell asleep on the couch watching television. His laptop was open next to him, and for the first time in months, he'd forgotten to close it. My hands were shaking as I carefully moved it to the coffee table and started looking through his files. What I found made my blood run cold. There were bank accounts I'd never seen before. Accounts with hundreds of thousands of dollars in them. Accounts that only had Trevor's name on them, not mine. There were emails between Trevor and people I didn't recognize, talking about moving money to places where it would be safe and untraceable. I found contracts for properties I'd never heard of, all signed with Trevor's name only. Properties that should have been joint assets in our marriage, but somehow weren't. I found invoices for work that was never done, payments to companies that didn't seem to exist. But the worst part was finding the emails between Trevor and Crystal. Not just love letters, but business emails. Crystal wasn't just his mistress. She was helping him steal money. She was the one setting up the fake companies, the one moving money between accounts, the one making sure everything looked legal on paper when it wasn't. I took pictures of everything with my phone, my hands shaking so badly I had to take some of them twice. Then I carefully closed the laptop and put it back exactly where Trevor had left it. The next morning, I called in sick to my part-time job at the local library. Instead of going to work, I drove to the police station. I didn't know what else to do. I felt like I was drowning in information I didn't understand. That's where I met Detective Garcia. He was a kind man with tired eyes who listened to my whole story without interrupting. When I showed him the pictures on my phone, his expression got very serious. "Mrs. Kane," he said, "I think you need to know that your husband is already on our radar. We've been investigating some suspicious financial activity in the real estate industry, and his name has come up several times." My heart sank. "How long have you been watching him?" "About 8 months," Detective Garcia said. "But we haven't had enough evidence to move forward. What you've brought me today could change everything." He explained that they suspected Trevor of money laundering, tax evasion, and fraud. But they needed someone on the inside to help them gather the evidence they needed to build a case. "I know this is a lot to ask," Detective Garcia said, "but would you be willing to help us? It would mean pretending everything is normal at home while we gather more evidence." I thought about Crystal's earrings on my nightstand. I thought about all the lies Trevor had told me. I thought about the future I'd planned that was never going to happen. "Yes," I said, "I'll help you." Working with Detective Garcia was like learning to live a double life. Every morning, I'd wake up next to Trevor and pretend to be the same trusting wife I'd always been. I'd make his coffee, kiss him goodbye, and wish him a good day at work. Then I'd spend my day gathering evidence that would eventually destroy him. Detective Garcia taught me how to be careful. He gave me a special phone that couldn't be traced, and we'd meet in different places around town. Sometimes at the library where I worked, sometimes at a coffee shop across town, sometimes just in his car in empty parking lots. He showed me what kinds of documents to look for and how to photograph them without leaving any trace that I'd been there. The hardest part was acting normal when I was learning just how deep Trevor's crimes went. It wasn't just stealing money from his business partners. He was running an entire network of fake companies, using them to wash money for people I'd never heard of. Some of the names in his files made Detective Garcia's face go pale when I showed him the pictures. "Your husband isn't just committing fraud," he told me one afternoon as we sat in his car behind a grocery store. "He's laundering money for some very dangerous people, people who don't like it when their business partners get arrested." That scared me more than anything. I realized that if Trevor got caught, he might try to blame everything on me to save himself. Or worse, the people he was working with might think I knew too much. But the biggest shock came 3 weeks into my investigation. I was in Trevor's office at home, photographing some new bank statements I'd found, when I heard voices downstairs. Trevor was supposed to be at work, but I recognized his laugh. I quickly put everything back and crept to the top of the stairs to listen. Trevor was in the kitchen with his mother, Margaret. They were talking in low voices, but I could hear every word. "The offshore accounts are all set up," Margaret was saying. "Crystal did a good job with the paperwork. Even if Natalie tries to claim half of everything in a divorce, that she'll never find these." My blood turned to ice. Margaret wasn't just Trevor's mother. She was part of the whole scheme. "What about the charity money?" Trevor asked. "All moved," Margaret said with a laugh. 20 years of donations to the Children's Hospital Fund, and they'll never know where it went. I've been skimming a little bit each year, but last month, I cleaned out the whole account. Almost $2 million. I had to grab the stair railing to keep from falling down. Margaret had been stealing from a children's charity. Money that was supposed to help sick kids was sitting in some secret bank account, while she planned to frame me for her son's crimes. "And if anyone asks questions," Trevor said, "we'll say Natalie was in charge of the charity books," Margaret replied. "She had access to everything. Who's going to believe she didn't know what was happening?" They were planning to destroy my life completely. Not just take my money, but make me look like a criminal. Make me look like someone who would steal from sick children. I heard footsteps coming toward the stairs, so I quickly went into the bathroom and turned on the shower. When Trevor came upstairs, I was getting ready to wash my hair, acting like I'd been there the whole time. "Hey, honey," he said, kissing my cheek. "I just stopped by to grab some files. How was your day?" "Good," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Just relaxing at home." He smiled at me, the same smile he'd given me on our wedding day. "I love you," he said. "I love you too," I lied. After he left, I called Detective Garcia immediately. When I told him what I'd heard, he was quiet for a long time. "This is bigger than we thought," he finally said. "We need to move carefully. If they're planning to frame you, we need to make sure we have enough evidence to prove your innocence before we make any arrests." That's when he told me about the recording devices. Tiny microphones that I could hide around the house to capture Trevor and Margaret's conversations. It was risky, but it was the only way to get the proof we needed. For the next month, I became a spy in my own home. I hid microphones in Trevor's office, in the kitchen, even in his car when I could manage it. I learned things about my husband that made me sick to my stomach. He wasn't just cheating on me with Crystal. He'd been cheating on me for years with different women. Crystal was just the latest one, and she was only with him because she thought he was rich. She had no idea that most of his money was stolen. I heard Trevor and Margaret planning exactly how they'd ruin my reputation. They were going to say I'd had a nervous breakdown, that I'd been acting strange and paranoid. They'd already talked to a doctor about having me declared mentally incompetent so they could control all the money. But the worst conversation I recorded was between Trevor and Crystal. They were in his office late one night, and they thought I was asleep upstairs. "What if she finds out?" Crystal asked. "She won't," Trevor said. "Natalie's not smart enough to figure this out. She's been following me around like a puppy for 12 years, doing whatever I tell her to do. She doesn't have the brains to see what's really happening." "But what if she does?" "Then we'll handle it," Trevor said, and his voice got cold in a way I'd never heard before. "We've come too far to let her ruin everything now." The way he said it made me realize that Trevor might be willing to do more than just steal my money and ruin my reputation. He might be willing to hurt me physically if I got in his way. That night, I lay in bed next to him, listening to him breathe, and I realized that the man I'd loved for 12 years had never really existed. The real Trevor was a stranger who saw me as nothing more than an obstacle to overcome. But he'd made one big mistake. He'd underestimated me, and I was going to make sure he paid for that mistake. The plan Detective Garcia and I came up with was risky, but it was the only way to catch them all in the act. I had to make Trevor, Margaret, and Crystal believe that I was falling apart mentally. I had to become the weak, broken woman they already thought I was, so they'd get careless and reveal everything. It started small. I began forgetting things on purpose, like where I put my keys or what I was supposed to pick up at the grocery store. When Trevor asked me about it, I'd act confused and upset, like I didn't understand what was happening to me. "I don't know what's wrong with me lately," I told him one morning, making my voice shake a little. "I feel so scattered all the time." Trevor's eyes lit up with interest, though he tried to hide it. "Maybe you should see someone about that, honey. Stress can do strange things to people." I knew he was thinking about the doctor they'd already contacted, the one who would say I was having a breakdown. So I played right into it. "Maybe you're right," I said. "I just feel so overwhelmed by everything. Sometimes I can't even remember what day it is." Over the next few weeks, I got better and better at acting like I was losing my mind. I'd start sentences and then stop in the middle, looking confused. I'd ask Trevor the same question multiple times in one conversation. I'd wear mismatched clothes or forget to brush my hair before going out. The hardest part was watching how happy it made them. Trevor started being extra sweet to me, bringing me flowers and telling me how much he loved me. But I could see the satisfaction in his eyes. He thought his plan was working perfectly. Margaret started visiting more often, always with a concerned expression on her face. "Poor dear," she'd say to Trevor when she thought I couldn't hear. "She's really not handling the stress well, is she?" Crystal was the worst. She'd call the house sometimes when Trevor wasn't home, pretending to be worried about me. "Hi, Mrs. Kane," she'd say in her fake, sweet voice. "I just wanted to check on you. Trevor mentioned you haven't been feeling well." But while they thought I was falling apart, I was actually getting stronger. Every fake conversation, every recorded meeting, every piece of evidence I gathered made me more determined to bring them down. The breakthrough came when I overheard Trevor on the phone with someone I'd never heard him mention before. He was in his office with the door closed, but I'd hidden a microphone in there weeks earlier. "The wife is losing it," Trevor was saying. "Perfect timing. We can move the rest of the money next week, and by the time anyone asks questions, she'll be in a mental health facility." The voice on the other end was muffled, but I could hear enough to know they were talking about moving millions of dollars. Money that belonged to Trevor's business partners, money from Margaret's charity, money that should have been mine. "What about the federal investigation?" the voice asked. My heart stopped. They knew about Detective Garcia's investigation. "Don't worry about that," Trevor said. "I've got someone inside the police department keeping me informed. They don't have enough evidence to move forward, and once Natalie's out of the picture, they never will." I felt sick. There was a corrupt cop helping Trevor. Someone who was supposed to be on the side of justice was actually helping him steal and lie. I called Detective Garcia immediately on the special phone he'd given me. When I told him what I'd heard, he was quiet for a long time. "We suspected there might be a leak," he finally said. "This confirms it. We need to move faster than we planned." That's when he told me about the final phase of our plan. In 2 days, Trevor, Margaret, and Crystal were meeting to finalize the transfer of the last batch of stolen money. Detective Garcia had been tracking their communications, and he knew they were planning to move everything to accounts in countries where it could never be recovered. "We need them to admit everything on tape," he said. "All three of them talking about all the crimes they have committed. It's the only way to make sure they can't wiggle out of this in court." So I had to push them into having that conversation. I had to make them so confident that they'd won that they'd celebrate by talking about everything they'd done. The night before their big meeting, I put on the performance of my life. I came downstairs for dinner looking completely disheveled, my hair messy and my clothes wrinkled. I sat at the table and stared at my food without eating. "Natalie?" Trevor said, his voice full of fake concern. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" I looked up at him with empty eyes. "I don't know," I whispered. "I can't remember things anymore. Sometimes I don't even know where I am." Trevor reached across the table and took my hand. "It's going to be okay," he said. "I'm going to take care of everything. You don't need to worry about money or business or any of that complicated stuff. I'll handle it all." "Promise?" I said, making my voice sound like a little girl's. "I promise," he said, and I could see the victory in his eyes. That night, I heard him on the phone with Margaret and Crystal, telling them that I was completely broken and they could move forward with their final plans. They were so excited, they could barely contain themselves. The next evening, they all came to our house for what they thought was a celebration dinner. I stayed upstairs, pretending to be too confused and upset to join them. But every word they said was being recorded by the devices I'd hidden throughout the house. And what they said was everything Detective Garcia needed to destroy them completely. They talked about every crime they'd committed, every person they'd stolen from, every lie they'd told. They laughed about how easy it had been to fool me, how stupid I was for trusting them. They planned how they'd spend the money once I was locked away in a mental hospital. Margaret even bragged about stealing from the children's charity, talking about how she'd been skimming money for years and how no one had ever suspected her. Crystal talked about the other men she'd blackmailed, wealthy clients of Trevor's company who'd paid her to keep quiet about their affairs. And Trevor talked about the corrupt cop who'd been feeding him information, mentioning the man's name and how much he'd been paying him. By the end of the night, I had everything I needed to send all three of them to prison for a very long time. The next morning, I wrote my letter to Judge Mitchell, including every detail of their crimes and every piece of evidence I'd gathered. Then I hand-delivered it to his office, knowing that in just a few days, I'd be sitting in that courtroom, watching their world fall apart. Judge Mitchell's voice filled the courtroom as he began reading my letter aloud. Every word hit Trevor, Margaret, and Crystal like a physical blow. I watched their faces change from confusion to horror to pure panic as the truth of what I'd discovered came pouring out. This letter details an extensive criminal conspiracy involving money laundering, embezzlement, fraud, and corruption, Judge Mitchell announced. His voice was calm, but there was steel underneath it. Mrs. Kane has provided documentation of offshore bank accounts, forged documents, and recorded conversations that reveal the scope of these crimes. Trevor's lawyer tried to interrupt. Your Honor, these are serious accusations that haven't been verified. Oh, but they have been, Judge Mitchell said, holding up a thick folder. The FBI delivered their investigation report to my chambers this morning. It seems Mrs. Kane has been working with federal investigators for months. The color drained completely from Trevor's face. He looked like he might throw up right there in the courtroom. Crystal grabbed his arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging into his suit jacket. Margaret was gripping the edge of the table so hard her knuckles had turned white. Judge Mitchell continued reading. The evidence shows that Mr. Kane has been operating a money laundering scheme through fake real estate companies, stealing from business partners and clients. Mrs. Margaret Kane has embezzled nearly $2 million from the Children's Hospital Charity Fund over the past 20 years. And Miss Crystal Winters has been blackmailing multiple wealthy men while helping to facilitate these financial crimes. Crystal let out a small whimper. She'd gone from looking like a confident woman who'd won the lottery to looking like a scared little girl who'd been caught stealing candy. But perhaps most disturbing, Judge Mitchell said, his voice getting harder, is the evidence of a conspiracy to frame Mrs. Natalie Kane for these crimes, while having her declared mentally incompetent to prevent her from defending herself. That's when Trevor finally found his voice. This is ridiculous, he shouted, jumping to his feet. She's lying. She's having a mental breakdown and making up stories. Judge Mitchell looked at him with the kind of expression you'd give a bug you were about to step on. Mr. Kane, I have recordings of you discussing these plans in detail. Would you like me to play them for the court? Trevor's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. No words came out. I thought not, Judge Mitchell said. Then he looked toward the back of the courtroom and nodded. That's when the doors opened and federal agents walked in. Detective Garcia was leading them, and he looked directly at me with a small smile. We'd done it. After months of planning and pretending and gathering evidence, we'd actually done it. Trevor Kane, you're under arrest for money laundering, fraud, and conspiracy, Detective Garcia announced as he approached Trevor's table. Margaret Kane, you're under arrest for embezzlement and conspiracy. Crystal Winters, you're under arrest for blackmail, fraud, and conspiracy. The courtroom erupted in chaos. Trevor's lawyer was shouting about his rights. Margaret was crying and claiming she didn't know anything about any crimes. Crystal was trying to run toward the exit, but another agent blocked her path. But I just sat there, calm and quiet, watching the three people who'd tried to destroy my life get exactly what they deserved. Trevor looked at me across the courtroom as the handcuffs clicked around his wrists. For the first time in months, I let him see the real me. I let him see that I wasn't the broken, confused woman he thought I was. I was the woman who'd outsmarted him at every turn. You, he said, his voice full of rage and disbelief. You did this? Yes, I said simply. I did. Judge Mitchell wasn't finished. As for the divorce proceedings, he announced, given that Mr. Kane's assets were obtained through criminal activity, and given his attempt to defraud his wife, I'm awarding Mrs. Kane full ownership of all legitimate marital assets. The court also finds that Mrs. Kane is entitled to compensation for the emotional distress caused by this conspiracy. Trevor's stolen money was frozen, but everything we'd built together legitimately was mine. The house, the cars, the business assets that were actually legal, all of it. Plus, I'd be getting money from the government as compensation for helping with their investigation. But the best part wasn't the money. The best part was watching Margaret, who'd spent 12 years telling me I wasn't good enough for her son, being led away in handcuffs. The best part was seeing Crystal, who'd thought she was so clever and beautiful and irresistible, crying as she realized her future was going to be spent in a prison cell instead of spending stolen money. And the best part was seeing Trevor, who'd called me stupid and weak and easy to fool, finally understanding that I'd been 10 steps ahead of him the entire time. As they were led away, Detective Garcia came over to me. "You did good, Mrs. Kane," he said. "This case is going to put away some very bad people for a very long time." "What happens now?" I asked. "Now you get to live your life," he said. "The real one. The one you deserve." 6 months later, I was sitting in my new office, looking out at the city skyline. I'd used the money from the divorce settlement to start a foundation that helped women escape financial abuse. We provided legal help, financial counseling, and safe places to stay for women whose husbands were trying to steal their futures. Trevor, Margaret, and Crystal were all in federal prison. The corrupt cop who'd been helping them was there too. And I was free. Free to be myself. Free to use my intelligence and strength to help other people instead of hiding it to protect a man who never deserved it. Free to build something real and meaningful with my life. Sometimes people ask me if I'm angry about the 12 years I lost with Trevor. But I'm not angry anymore. Those years taught me exactly how strong I really am. And now I get to use that strength to make sure other women never have to go through what I went through. Justice isn't just about punishment. Sometimes it's about taking the worst thing that ever happened to you and turning it into the best thing you ever did for someone else.